The man who built his entire career on one single promise, that the system is rigged by powerful people who use institutions to enrich themselves and their families while working Americans foot the bill, just had that exact accusation turned around and pointed directly at him, and he did not handle it well. A reporter asked Bernie Sanders one straightforward question about his stepson collecting $800,000 from a progressive nonprofit. One question. And the senator who has stood at podiums for 4 decades demanding accountability from everyone else completely came apart on camera. Now, here is what the mainstream press is not telling you. That $800,000 did not come from billionaires. It did not come from hedge fund managers or the donor class Bernie Sanders has spent his entire career attacking. It came from teachers. It came from nurses. It came from retirees counting their Social Security checks before hitting send on a $27 donation because they believed this man was finally fighting for them. Once you see where that money actually came from and where it actually went, the Bernie Sanders brand does not look the same ever again. To understand why that reaction was so extreme, you have to understand what Bernie Sanders has actually been selling for the last 4 decades. Not just policies, not just proposals, a story. And that story starts in Brooklyn, 1941, in a modest apartment in Flatbush, where a Polish immigrant named Eli Sanders sold paint for a living and raised 2 boys on the kind of income where every dollar had a destination before it arrived. The younger boy, Bernie, grew up watching his father work hard enough to survive and never quite hard enough to get ahead. That experience did not leave him. It became the foundation of everything that came after. By his 20s, Bernie Sanders was getting arrested at civil rights demonstrations. He was reading Marx. He was reading Eugene Debs. He moved to Vermont in 1964 with $60 in his pocket and a conviction that the American economic system was designed to keep working people exactly where they were. He ran for office and lost. He ran again and lost again. He ran 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, losing every single one. Most people would have stopped. Bernie Sanders did not stop. In 1990, he won a congressional seat. In 2006, he won a Senate seat. And by 2016, 35 years after that first campaign, he was filling arenas with tens of thousands of people who had never been to a political rally in their lives. People who drove hours to stand in the cold because they believed this man was finally saying what nobody else in Washington would say out loud. The system is rigged. The billionaires are buying our democracy. The working class is getting crushed while the wealthy use every institution available to protect and grow their own wealth. The average donation to his 2016 campaign was $27. Not a typo. $27 from millions of ordinary Americans who could not afford much but believed enough to give what they had. That story, that Brooklyn origin, that $60 in Vermont, that rumpled suit and the pointed finger at the powerful, that was not just biography. That was the product. That was the brand that made Bernie Sanders the most famous Democratic socialist in American history. And brands, once built carefully enough, start functioning as shields. They make certain questions feel like attacks instead of reasonable inquiries. They make scrutiny look like smear. For years, that shield worked. And then the tax filings came out. Nonprofit organizations operating in the United States are required by law to publicly disclose their finances through a document called the IRS Form 990. This is not a leak. This is not a whistleblower. This is public record, available to any donor, any journalist, any citizen who wants to look. Form 990 filings show compensation paid to employees, grant-making decisions, and how organizational money is actually being spent. They are dry documents. They are dense. And that dryness, that density, is exactly why most people never read them. The gap between what is technically public and what anyone actually looks at is where a remarkable amount of money moves very quietly. According to reporting based on those filings, Levi Sanders received approximately $800,000 in total compensation from a progressive nonprofit organization. Levi Sanders is Bernie's stepson. He is the biological son of Jane Sanders from a relationship that predated her marriage to Bernie. He grew up inside the progressive organizing world, the exact same world his stepfather spent 4 decades building, legitimizing, and directing his supporters to fund. He is not a household name. He was not the face of any campaign. He was working inside the infrastructure, collecting a salary from an organization that described its mission using the exact same language Bernie Sanders has delivered from Senate floors for the better part of his adult life. $800,000 from a progressive nonprofit. In a sector Bernie Sanders has spent his career asking working Americans to trust and support with their donations. Now, the defense you will hear is this. Nonprofits are not volunteer organizations. Executives and staff at advocacy organizations earn compensation. Nothing about this arrangement was illegal. And that defense is technically accurate on every point. Nobody is claiming a law was broken. But what that defense does not address, what it carefully steps around every single time, is the question that actually matters to every single person who ever wrote a check or clicked donate because they believed in this movement. Did the donors to that organization know their money was compensating the stepson of the politician whose brand inspired their donation in the first place? In virtually every case, the answer is no. They had no idea. They gave to the cause. They did not give to the family. And there is a direct line connecting Bernie Sanders' political operation, the organizations he directed supporters toward, and the nonprofit that paid Levi Sanders a sum that most of those same supporters will never see in 15 years of full-time work. That line is the part his team has been hoping nobody draws out loud. Because here is the number that reframes this entire story. At the time Levi Sanders was receiving this compensation, the median American worker was earning approximately $55,000 a year. A teacher in Phoenix, a warehouse worker in Detroit, a nurse working double shifts, $55,000. Levi Sanders collected more from a single nonprofit role at an organization supposedly dedicated to working class advocacy than the average American earns in nearly 15 years of continuous full-time work. Bernie Sanders has given speeches about exactly this. He has stood at podiums and described concentrated compensation inside nonprofit structures as a moral failure. He has named the pattern where well-connected individuals use charitable organizations to pay themselves and their allies while ordinary donors believe the money is going to the cause. He has called that corruption. He was not describing a hypothetical. He was describing with precision he never intended to apply to himself the exact arrangement his own family was benefiting from while those speeches were being delivered. And that is why when a reporter finally connected those dots out loud, the senator who built a career on composed, righteous accountability did not stay composed. He did not dismiss it calmly. He did not refer the reporter to a prepared statement. What happened on camera was something else entirely. And the reason it went that far, the reason the reaction was that unguarded and that raw, has everything to do with who first published the story. Because it was not the New York Post. It was not a conservative outlet he could wave away. It was someone from his own side. And what they said using his own words as the standard is the part that changes everything about what you are watching when you watch that clip. When a story like this first surfaces, there is a predictable sequence that plays out in American political media. Conservative outlets pick it up. The New York Post runs it. The Washington Free Beacon runs it. The Daily Wire runs it. And the moment those bylines appear, Bernie Sanders' supporters have everything they need to dismiss the entire thing without engaging a single fact inside it. Political attack from the right, motivated reporting, nothing to see here. That playbook has worked for Bernie Sanders more times than his critics would like to admit. It worked during the Burlington College investigation. It worked during the Lake House controversy. It worked every single time a Sanders family financial arrangement attracted attention that his team found inconvenient. The base discredits the source. The mainstream media looks away. The story loses oxygen and dies. This one did not die. And the reason it did not die is the reason Bernie Sanders could not stay composed when it came back around. Because this time the story was picked up by a progressive outlet, a publication that has spent years defending the Sanders political project, covering his campaigns favorably, treating his policy agenda seriously, and positioning itself explicitly on the left side of the American political spectrum. That publication had no incentive to help conservatives attack Bernie Sanders, no institutional reason to go after a figure their own readership admires. And they went through the Form 990 filings themselves independently without relying on anything a right-wing outlet had reported. What they found and what they published in their own words was that the compensation arrangements at the organization employing Levi Sanders were inconsistent with the standards Bernie Sanders has publicly demanded of other political figures, not a conservative conclusion. A progressive publication using Bernie Sanders' own 4 decades of rhetoric as the measuring stick and concluding that his family had been paid in ways he would not tolerate from anyone else. That is a different kind of problem entirely. You can dismiss the New York Post. You cannot dismiss your own side using your own words to say you failed your own standard. That is why the reaction was not a measured press statement. That is why it was not a calm deflection. When the criticism comes from inside the house, the shield does not work. The brand cannot absorb it. And what gets captured on camera instead is the unguarded version of a man who has spent 40 years telling other people to answer for exactly this kind of thing and has just been told he has to answer for it himself. But to understand the full weight of that moment, you have to go back to 2016, because this is not the first time the Sanders family has been at the center of a story about progressive institution money going sideways. Not even close. And the parallel between what happened then and what is happening now is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. In 2016, the same year Bernie Sanders was raising $228 million from small donors and filling arenas with people who believed he was finally the politician who would fight for them, his wife Jane Sanders was presiding over a serious financial problem at a Vermont institution. Jane Sanders had served as president of Burlington College from 2004 to 2011. In 2010, she oversaw the acquisition of 33 acres of land using a $10 million loan from People's United Bank. The loan application allegedly included donor pledge letters that the bank later disputed. The numbers did not work. Burlington College could not service the debt. And in May 2016, while Bernie Sanders was on a stage in Brooklyn promising to hold the wealthy accountable for using institutions to enrich themselves, Burlington College announced it was closing permanently. 400 students, one campus, gone. The FBI opened an investigation into Jane Sanders in 2017 for possible bank fraud. It ran for over a year. It was closed in 2018 without charges being filed. Bernie's supporters immediately called the investigation politically motivated, pointing to the Trump administration as the source of pressure behind it. Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy was separately reported to have contacted the relevant United States Attorney's Office during the active investigation. His office described that contact as routine. Critics used a different word. The investigation closed, the story faded, the playbook worked again. But here is what was happening in that exact same window of time that almost nobody put together in a single frame. Between 2016 and 2017, while Burlington College was collapsing and while a federal investigation into his wife was open, Bernie Sanders earned approximately $1.75 million from book deals. His book, Our Revolution, alone generated close to $900,000 in royalties. In August 2016, he purchased a lake house in North Hero, Vermont for $575,000. That same summer, he was on stages asking supporters to give what they could to the movement. The same summer, Burlington College was closing its doors on 400 students. He was personally wealthier than he had ever been in his entire life. For 30 years, Bernie Sanders had attacked the millionaires and billionaires. You have heard the phrase so many times it became almost rhythmic. The millionaires and billionaires. The millionaires and billionaires rigging the system. After 2016, reporters began noticing something. The word millionaires was quietly disappearing from his stump speeches, not announced, not explained, just gone. By the time he launched his 2019 presidential campaign, it was only billionaires. A CBS reporter caught it on camera and asked him directly, "You are a millionaire now. Has your view changed?" His answer was 4 words. "I wrote a damn good book," not an acknowledgement, not a reflection, a defense that assumed the question itself was unfair. Think about the logic sitting underneath that answer, because what Bernie Sanders communicated in that moment, without meaning to, is the same logic that sits underneath the Levi Sanders story and underneath the Burlington College story and underneath every financial arrangement involving the Sanders family that has attracted scrutiny over the last decade. When I accumulate wealth, I earned it. When others accumulate wealth through institutions and infrastructure, they exploited someone. That exemption, applied consistently to himself and his family while being denied to everyone else, is not a political position. It is a pattern. And the donors who funded the nonprofit paying Levi Sanders $800,000 deserve to know that the pattern existed long before their money entered the picture. Now connect what you have just seen across the full timeline. Jane Sanders and the Burlington College loan, the FBI investigation that ran for over a year, the lake house purchase the same summer the college collapsed, the word millionaires quietly edited out of the stump speech, and now Levi Sanders inside the progressive nonprofit infrastructure Bernie Sanders spent 4 decades building and directing supporters to fund, collecting compensation that most of those same supporters will never earn in 15 years of full-time work. 4 data points, 1 pattern. A political brand built entirely on the demand that powerful people be held accountable for using institutions to enrich themselves and their families, applied to everyone except the family behind the brand. But there is still one piece of this story that the mainstream press has refused to report in full, the piece that answers the question you have had since the beginning of this video. Because the nonprofit that paid Levi Sanders did not exist in isolation, it was connected, and when you trace where its funding actually came from, it leads directly back to something that should make every single person who ever gave $27 to this movement stop completely and ask one question they were never supposed to ask.